Hello, so today we're going to be talking about ORNN artifacts. This is going to be the much awaited ORNN artifact guide where I go through every single ORNN artifact, explain what they do, what users you want to use for them, and how you can get the most out of ORNN artifacts in set 14 of TFT. Before we get straight into all the artifact information, I would recommend you like and subscribe. It does help me out quite a bit. This was a video that takes a lot of extra time compared to my daily videos. I do post daily guides, so if you're looking to get the most out of your set 14, or if you really like this video and it helped you, or if you're a returning person who checked out my channel in the past, it's free. You know, like and subscribe. It does help me out quite a bit. There's also memberships where I offer coaching and other stuff, so if you're interested in that, you can also look for that. And there's also my store, which is going to get updated with a lot of art, because at the end of the month I'm going to be releasing a bunch of new art because I'm doing a bunch of art for some conventions. But anyways, let's talk about TFT right now. ORNN artifacts. So this is going to be the main ORNN artifact guide. When I talk about ORNN artifacts, there's different things that you can get, or different ways you can get them, usually via augments, where you're kind of like ripping an artifact and hoping that you hit something that helps out your team. But the most often situation where you're kind of plunged into this ORNN artifact or having to deal with it is when you have a game starting portal where you just kind of have to rip open an artifact and then play around whatever you hit. A lot of times when you're looking at artifacts, you'll also notice that, you know, it's skewed towards 5 costs. In this presentation, I'm going to try my best to identify where I think the numbers are skewed, and I kind of try and organize them in a way that's a little bit more digestible for beginner players. In this slideshow, or in this set of presentation that I'm doing, I rank the ORNN artifacts, or I talk about them in 3 different ways. I either call them generic, where they're good on most units and usually on most 5 costs that can help you to cap your board. They're specific, where they have conditions that have to be met, because a lot of the ORNN artifacts have particular conditions associated with them where they won't really do anything and often could be worse than an actual item on a unit just because they have these special effects that need to synergize. And then there's forcing, where they're only good on specific units and very bad to take otherwise, and these can often be very griefing if you put them on a unit where it's like basically has like almost like a negative synergy with their kit. So when I talk about them, I'm gonna have this color code, which will help you to identify them as we go through it. But anyways, if we're thinking about ORNN artifacts, basically when you take artifacts, you want to go for a comp that requires many items. When you're taking artifacts, it can help you with like general itemization. You want to pick comps that can use different ORNN items. You don't really want to look for an ORNN item a lot of the times if it's only a specific scenario that you want to try and win or have your win condition, because then you might be really disappointed if you're chasing that certain situation. So a lot of times artifacts that work really well, a lot of times reroll comps lend their way to many artifacts. A lot of the artifacts scale really well with lots of stats like HP, AD, armor, and MR. So if you rip open an artifact that way, then you can usually find either a frontline or a backline item, or if you're playing comps where you have AP and AD carries, you can find one of the artifacts that will probably be useful on some sort of unit. But also you can often rip artifacts if you're playing in a very first or 8th way and you're trying to chase that one particular scenario, because there are some artifacts that make certain comps playable, that make certain comps broken, and often can put you in a very good spot. So that's usually what happens with artifacts, somewhere along that spectrum. These are notes just in general. Note that this is from patch 14.3. Some of the stats are going to be skewed towards popular comps. You're going to see a lot of Samira on a lot of these artifacts, a lot of Streak Demon. There's also Syndicate, because Syndicate's popular reroll. And there's also going to be a general Cypher skew, so some of the Cypher units are going to see a lot of appearances on these slides. That's because you get a lot of cash outs from Cypher that are ORNN artifacts, and because those are really high-end cash outs, it can skew the stats a little bit to say that it's a little bit better on certain units. The stats that are inflated by these comps you should take note of, and there's also inflation for certain win conditions with artifacts, which we'll also talk about as we go through them. But anyways, now we're going to go through all the artifacts. This is going to be in alphabetical order, and I'm going to try my best to go through each of the I'm going to try and go through this video and put like timestamps for them, but if you struggle to find them or if the timestamps aren't correct, then just know that it's in alphabetical order. So first up, we have Anima Visage. So Anima Visage, basically it's a tank item that gives you HP and then it heals percentage max health every second. This is a very generic item. It's typically just considered to be a really good tank item. It heals and gives HP. It's really good with reroll units, so if you see some of the main users that I show up, I put Braum at the top of the list. If you're rerolling a unit and they're 3-star, they're going to inherently have a lot of extra tankiness, a lot of extra HP, so they can make great use of the Anima Visage. Additionally, it can be really good with any tanky melee. This is one of those artifacts that you see it and you're pretty happy because you can easily slot it in with almost anybody. Here I just put a couple suggested users, obviously some 5-cost skews or some 5-cost that's really good on, but no matter who your tank is, this is something that you can usually put on them and have some good effect. Typically, it's going to work with your higher HP units, so things like Cho'Gath and Nico, takes advantage of Street Demon and Bruiser, respectively, could help out a little bit more, or your reroll units, which will be beneficial. Brightening Jewel. So Brightening Jewel is pretty specific and forcing. I would argue it's pretty forcing. Basically, the way Brightening Jewel works is that every time you deal magic damage, you reduce the target's magic resist. So it works kind of like a little bit of a utility item, which is why you can maybe put on some other units. But if you actually want to make the most of this unit, you want to have units that attack a lot or hit a unit, hit units in particular many times. This usually causes the their magic resist to go to 0, and then you generate extra mana, so then you continue to chain cast and you just absolutely decimate the whole board. This is one of the main conditions to play Fiddlesticks reroll. Basically, this item is extremely good with units to do damage over time, or dot damage. Basically, if you have a damage that it ticks down, each of those ticks will count as an instance of magic damage, so it will greatly reduce their magic resist, and then it will also generate you mana, so they'll be taking a huge amount of damage, and you'll also be generating mana, so just chain cast and absolutely decimate. So this is one of the conditions to usually play around Fiddlesticks. If you see Brightening Jewel, you should always be thinking, okay, it's probably a Fiddlesticks game if I have to force towards it. It's also pretty good on Morgana, because Morgana also does dot damage. Additionally, you could put it on units that just do magic damage to use it as like an alternative way of shredding, but that's not what I would recommend. It's not a good situation that you're going to be in. You really want to put on a dot damage unit, so either Fiddlesticks or Morgana, and I would lean more towards Fiddlesticks. I think Morgana comp is a lot weaker with a similar idea that you need to have. Next, let's talk about Death's Defiance. This one's pretty generic. Basically, it's like similar to like a Bloodthirster or a Hodge. It's mostly like an Omnivamp item. It gives some attack speed, some AD, and some tanky stats as well. But basically, it gives you almost like a little bit of a second lease at life. It's good for melee units, and it helps with survivability a lot. You can put on anybody to help with survivability because it still does give some decent stats. 10 AD and 25 attack speed isn't that bad. So you could put on some backline AD units. But the main units you're going to be thinking about are Shaco Zed. And then Vi here, of course, there's a little bit of a Cypher skew, but this is more related to Vi Hero Augment, which is pretty strong with a lot of different artifacts. It can also be really good on a lot of 5-cost units, so Garen, Renekton, and then Samira. There's a little bit of a skew because of how Street Demons are really strong, but a unit like Samira, when she dives into like, you know, the fray, she can sometimes get exploded and bursted down, so Death's Defiance gives her a little bit of extra survivability there, but not super recommended on her. It's mostly skewed because Street Demons are so strong. Additionally, similar, like you might think of a Death's Defiance as similar to being a Bloodthirster, but be careful because a lot of units that really like Bloodthirster, like the Bloodthirster shield that you get, which gives you like a second lease at life. So sometimes you'll see Death's Defiance actually paired with other Omnivamp items, and even sometimes paired with a Bloodthirster, because sometimes it's just not enough. But of course, like units like Zed and Shaco, they have other means of survivability, so it's not too bad. Next, we have Deathfire Grasp. So Deathfire Grasp, the tooltip that I have here is a little bit outdated. Here it just talks about like bursting with 20% max health as magic damage. It also gives some damage amp. It's pretty generic because it could be used on a lot of different AP units. It's mostly like an AP damage item. It also gives a little bit of damage amp, so it can work really well with units that crit. Typically, the units that you want to put it on, though, it's more towards like Vigor, Varus, Ziggs Brand. It can also work on in some cases, but it's more geared towards Vigor, in my opinion. I think that's a better holder of the item because he has the slots. Usually, the other units, you're kind of competing with item slots of what items you want to put on. Similarly, it can be good on Aurora and Kabuko because Kabuko can help just melt frontline as well as just like have that extra AP. Aurora as well. Vex and Annie, it's also okay on. It can work really well on Vex because Vex has like the Executioner abilities critting already, and then you can get extra stats from Deathfire Grasp and kind of delete units a little bit faster. However, with these units, it's often competing for real estate. Vex really wants to have an Omnivamp item like Gunblade, so then if you have Gunblade, blue buff, like a casting item, and then Deathfire, it's a little bit awkward. So it's really situational. You have to have good augments to support that. And Annie as well, you really want to have like double mana on her, so then it kind of doesn't fit in very nicely. So they're not super recommended, but I still put them here because I just want to, like, you know, tell you guys, like, you know, you have options if you take these items, because it is pretty generic. It can still work as an item. You just might need a little bit of extra work if it's not a unit that has, like, you know, pretty flexible items, if that makes sense, because it would be more of a flexible AP item. Next is Fishbones. So Fishbones is specific and forcing. Basically, the way Fishbones works is that it gives you a bunch of AD and attack speed, you double your range, and then it causes you to attack random enemies. So the random enemies aspect could be a blessing and could be a curse. Now, in the current landscape of the game, it actually can work on many different units. Usually you want to put on high AD units that can kind of one-shot a unit. Shaco, you'll see come up a lot whenever you have items that increase the attack range. Shaco is a unit that really likes to have increased attack range, because then he kind of turns into like a pseudo backline unit that can scale up his AD really effectively. So a lot of times this just converts Shaco from being a frontline unit to being more of a backline unit, which is actually really powerful. And we see this happen quite a bit in like lots of different sets of TFT. You'll also see that it's good on like a unit that makes sense, kind of like Xayah or Senna, where they're a high AD unit, either with Marksman or Slayer, that they can just like delete units. However, you'll also see it's pretty good on Vex and Veigar. That's because they still, even without the AD and attack speed that the Fishbones gives, their kit in general is really good at one-shotting units. So putting on a Vex or a Veigar can often just scam fights, because they will just snipe a backline unit and just instantly kill them because they have insane one-shot potential. Now, I would recommend putting on AD units primarily. However, it is very good on Veigar and Vex as of the current patch. So maybe things will change in the future, but I want to make it very clear it is a good item on them because they can just one-shot backline units. It's ridiculously funny, and you can just win out for free with it. With those type of builds. But like I said, if we're playing TFT like long term, like, you know, it makes more sense on like a Xayah in my opinion, or a Senna. But either way, it can also cause random switching, so be very careful. And the extra range, it works really well for some units, but sometimes it can be a little bit awkward. You really want to try and position in such a way that you're trying to snipe the enemy carry. So often you put Fishbones at your carry and you put it on the same side as the enemy carry, so you just instantly target them and kill them with that Fishbones extra range. It can also be good on some 5-costs like Urgot and Samira, a little bit of skewing. Ziggs as well, similar idea to Veigar and Vex. He has a good chance of just like dropping a bomb and one-shotting, especially if his plus bomb only hits one unit, it does more damage, so that's like a way that it can work. And then Twisted Fate it can also work on. I would be very cautious with somebody like Twisted Fate, because a lot of times Twisted Fate, you're ramping up attack speed and you're like kind of whittling away at a unit. But if you use Fishbones, then you're just like randomly target switching all the time, and you can end up just not killing anything. A lot of times it's better to focus fire. But similarly, if you have like a build with Twisted Fate where you're ramping up like AP, something like Archangels, he can often like get to a point where he's one-shotting units, and that's where the Fishbones can come into play as being okay on him as well. Next, we have Gambler's Blade. So Gambler's Blade basically is a gold generation tool. It's pretty generic, but usually what you're taking it for is to generate extra gold. It does work primarily as an attack speed item. Basically, up to 30 gold in your bank, you're going to get extra attack speed, and then each attack has a chance to drop. So you want to put this on an auto-attacking unit primarily. I would say that it is good to pair with a Guinsoo or Guinsoo units. Typically, you look at this and you think of it as a Twisted Fate item. If you see Gambler's Blade, you're thinking Twisted Fate. That's the main thing. Now, you could move it onto a unit like Vayne, and late game, it can go onto a unit like Aurora. Vayne usually likes double attack speed and wants to hit a lot of units as 3-stars, because usually you're playing Vayne reroll. So it makes sense on Vayne as well, but Vayne doesn't really make use of the AP very well, so you know it's kind of a little bit awkward. There's other units that you can work on, like Aphelios, who really likes to have double Rage Blade setups often, so this can take the place of one of those Rage Blades, but it will be less effective. It's more so that you're taking it for econ generation, so it's not very good on Aphelios. I would definitely, if you had to force something, play Gambler's Blade Twisted Fate. I think that's the better option. Then there's other things that you might see in the stats that I just wanted to mention very briefly here. I don't want to, I just put them on the slide. I said not real. So Zed and Misfortune, you'll see them do really well in the stats with Gambler's Blade. This isn't real. This is mostly late game transferring, because obviously Gambler's Blade isn't going to be the best item because it's a gold generation tool. So if you're playing like Twisted Fate or Vayne, a lot of times you transfer the item off of them late game and replace it with a proper item or a Guinsoo that is just a better version of the item. So that's why the stats look really good on these units, because it's more so like, hey, late game, I'm I'm in such a good spot that I'm able to take this item off of my carry, put a better item on my carry, and then just shove it on one of the random units that's on my board. So don't get baited by the stats there. Like, I wouldn't take Gambler's Blade and say it's an MF game. Do you get what I'm trying to say? Hopefully that makes sense. Just in case some of you guys look this up on your own, I'm trying to make it as streamlined and as informative as possible. Next, we have Gold Collector. So Gold Collector, it basically gives your attacks an execute. So after, below 12% max health, they'll just die, and it also is a gold generation tool. So it gives you some crit chance and AD, so it's primarily going to be used on AD units. It's pretty generic. It's usually as an econ augment, but it's also really good with units that have a lot of stats. If you have a lot of base AD and you can pair that with crit chance, you have a really good chance of just one-shotting units, because the extra execute kind of works on like it's extra tack on of true damage that you can do. So it works really well on units like Xayah that's just good at exploding. Aphelios, that's a marksman that also can just like explode units, and Senna, where if you have like a Senna 3, if you're playing Senna reroll, could just have a massive amount of AD and just one-shot units. So it's going to be really good. Here, there's a typo. I said stats inflated towards Artillerist. Ignore that. That's just something that was from last set that I didn't delete that line. Other units that I can work on is units like 5 cost, Samira, and Garen, obviously skewed towards 5 cost being a high roll spot that you hit towards the end of the game. Garen hits multiple units, so the execute can actually work really well. He's very good at just doing a huge amount of burst damage, especially in marksman setups. If you get marksman mod on Garen, that's a common way of capping out the board, and then the gold collector could be transferred onto him from some of the other units, and you can play a more general set of items on your carries, so that's something that you can look out for as well. Next, we have Horizon Focus. So Horizon Focus is a very specific item. Basically, the way it works, if you stun an enemy, you then do 30% of their max health as magic damage. So this is required aspect of this item is that your unit needs to stun. If your unit does not stun, the item does pretty much nothing. It just gives you 250 health and 20 armor. So you need to have a unit that's stunned. So it's very specific. Now, of the units that can stun, it's really good on Zac, Sejuani, and Kabuko, because their stuns are very effective. Zac, it's the best item on Zac. If you see this, you usually want to angle towards a late game Zac, because he will just continue to stun every time he bounces and continue to proc this 30% max health magic damage, which is just massive. Sejuani also has a massive stun, and Kabuko has a massive stun. They can make great use of Horizon Focus. There are other units that stun like Leona, Varus, Mordekaiser, Alistar. I'm sure I missed a couple other ones, but I would not go for these units because their stuns aren't effective enough to make this Horizon Focus have a lot of value. You're taking up an item slot on all of these units, especially the backline units, where it can be really awkward for them to do damage regularly outside the Horizon Focus. Like the 30% magic damage that you do doesn't compensate well enough for like having proper tank items or proper damage items on the units. It's really good on the units, however, that have these wide good stuns like Kabuko, Sejuani, Zac, because you get a lot of value off of it. You're basically just deleting so much HP off the board that's like something that's worthwhile to put the item on. Next, we have Hullcrusher. Hullcrusher is very generic. Basically, it gives you some resistances, some attack speed, and then if there's no adjacent allies, it gives you 600 health. It's very good. It's a good frontline item. It gives a lot of stats. It's pretty like boring, I would say. Like, I think a lot of times if you see Hullcrusher, you're like, this is a pretty boring item compared to some of the other more exciting ORNN artifacts, but it's one that you can't really go wrong with a lot of the time, unless you're like playing Street Demons and you have specific Street Demon hexes that are really awkward to position around, but that's something you just have to account for. A lot of times this requires you to solo frontline or kind of like put your unit off to the side without adjacent allies, but that's not too much of an issue, like I said, unless you're playing something like Street Demons in some cases. It can also be very strong on melee units in particular, because melee units or units that are trying to attack a lot could also make use of just regular tank stats. Typically right now though, there is a little bit of a skew towards some of the Street Demon boards. Because it gives so much HP, it's also a little bit skewed towards the what's it called? The bruiser boards that can make use of that extra HP. Kabuko, it gives him just great stats. It makes him an absolute monster. Braum with Twisted Fate reroll. Nico just loves to have like lots of stats because of strategist. So you're going to get HP, armor, and Amar. And then you get the strategist durability. So the Nico becomes an absolute monster. Darius, bruiser and reroll unit. Cho'Gath, bruiser that can make great use of Hullcrusher. Zac, great bruiser cruiser style unit, like, you know, scales off HP really well. And then you have some of the other units. You could put on pretty much any tank. Some of the other tanks like Sejuani and Galio are a little bit awkward because Sejuani you kind of don't want to get aggroed first because she can sometimes die, and Galio is a little bit more specific because he's a bastion, so like it kind of like a little bit awkward with the extra resistances, and also it's more of like a Cypher cash out thing when you see Galio, so I'd be a little bit more skeptical of that. Next we have Infinity Force. So Infinity Force is very generic. It basically just gives you a bunch of stats. It's just tons of everything. It gives you AD, AP, armor MR, attack speed, HP, starting mana. The main users that you want to think about are usually frontline attack damage or melee style users, just because they can make use of all the stats, right? If you're in the front line, you love the HP, the armor, and magic resist, and you also can make use of the attacking stats, so the AP and the AD, because it will make you be very powerful, and starting mana is good on everybody a lot of the time. Just get your ult off a little bit faster. So units like Zed, Shaco, and Kabuko can work really well with this, as well as Garen. They just love to have all these stats. Think of a lot of the lines that work with Divinicorp. It's a similar idea, right? Zed loves those type of boards because he gets a bunch of stats and he becomes not only tanky but also a huge damage dealer. Now it's not particularly strong unless you can make use of all the stats, right? Sometimes backline units might suffer with it a little bit because you don't need some of the defensive stats if you're in the backline, because that's the whole point of having a front line. But it can be good on melee units or any units that have strong AP or AD ratios. Here, other users can also be some of the 5 costs as well as some other melee style 5 costs. Something that is pretty good with this though is that it does give a lot of stats. Even in its base form, if you're putting on a backline unit, it still gives survivability, AP, AD. So if you are in a spot where you need to put an item on a unit, you could still put Infinity Force on the backline unit and you'll be probably okay with that. Next, we have Innervating Locket. So Innervating Locket is a little bit more specific. Basically, it gives some HP and some starting mana, and then if you're you gain 2% mana whenever you're hit by an attack, and then you basically will recover HP every time you cast. This item is pretty good on high HP units and bruisers, so typically reroll units or units that want to be solo frontlined as well can work out really well with this, just because you're trying to repeatedly heal up a large portion of HP. So if you're restoring 20% of your HP every cast, you want to have a lot of HP, so that effective amount of HP restoration is going to be massive. The mana that you get as well can help you to cast, which can help you to scale really well into your late game if you have an ability that scales you very nicely. It's good on units with strong casts as well, but often you're going to play it more towards reroll. It's really good on somebody like Cho'Gath, for example, because Cho'Gath not only is a bruiser that has a lot of HP, but he gains more HP every time he casts. So if you put it on Cho'Gath and you get him to cast repeatedly, he'll continue to recover HP, and he'll be recovering more and more HP as the fight goes on, and he'll be unkillable a lot of the time. Somebody like Darius that's reroll, or Braum that's reroll, can work out really well. Mundo and reroll lines or just scaling off HP can be really well. But then there's also units that are really tanky, just hard to deal with, like Nico and Kabuko, that it can help them to have a lot of survivability. Zac is also somebody that you love to have cast and scales really well off HP, because he's going to gain a lot of HP if you're playing Zac into your late game. I would say be careful if the unit isn't super tanky. You might look at this and say, well, it helps me to generate mana, so why wouldn't it be good on a unit like Sejuani that you just get a lot of stuns off? Sejuani stuns, usually you want to front load the stun, and she's not somebody that usually gets multiple stuns off and lives forever in a fight. It's very rare that your Sejuani is living till like deep into the game. She usually just like, you get the stun off and she dies pretty convincingly. So Innervating Locket, you lose a lot of value there, because you'd rather just have like, you know, something like a Protector's Vow or other items that can scale her a little bit more, because the stats on the Innervating Locket aren't that high, and it's not going to greatly increase the amount of cast that she does, because she doesn't like, she's not usually like in a comp that she's living forever. Maybe in like Exotech line with some really high HP items like Warmogs, it might be a little bit better, but I would just say be careful about that. Don't get baited into it, because it's a little bit awkward. Next we have Lich Bane. So Lich Bane, the first attack after each cast deals bonus magic damage. This is a little bit of a specific item, because you really want to have it on units that cast a lot. It's an AP item, but it really doesn't get a lot of effect unless your unit is like chain casting or casting repeatedly. So this is going to be good on blue buff holders typically, or units that are just trying to like delete with blue buff. So Annie, that's like a chain cast bot, it would be pretty good on, because she's just going to have increased damage with those extra attacks after. Vex, chain cast a lot, going to be pretty good on her as well. And Yumi, chain cast a lot, going to be pretty good on her. I would say the item is pretty underpowered though, because a lot of these units have item sets that are pretty flushed out. Like Vex, it's hard to put extra items on her, like I said before, because you really want to have Gunblade on her. If you don't have Gunblade on her, you're kind of in an awkward spot, because that's like a really important item to her kit, so your flexibility on items is a little bit awkward. It can also be good on units like Ziggs and Aurora. Of course, like, you know, some of this is skewed towards like 5 costs and the comps that they're representing being particularly strong right now. There's other blue buff holders like Vigor that it's not super great on, and that's usually because Vigor doesn't really attack that fast. So like even with the Lich Bane, you're kind of like nerfing his damage a lot for nothing really, because you really want him to have the items to one shot. That's like his whole thing. So it's like a little bit awkward on a unit like that, so just be careful there. Next, we have Lightshield Crest. So this is a pretty generic item. Basically, every 3 seconds, you shield the lowest percentage health ally for 50% of your armor and magic resist. So this can work on pretty much any tank. It just scales off of armor. Now, typically, right now, there isn't really a comp that makes use of something like 6 Bastion. But if you're thinking about the Bastion trait, where you're getting a bunch of armor and MR on the units themselves, this would be something that works really well on them. It would also work well on stuff like full armor. I put a Gargoyle Stoneplate here just to represent that idea. But usually, you're pairing it with like tank items, like armor and MR items, and as well you're pairing it with Bastion units primarily. Of course, Bastion, like 6 Bastion, there isn't a line right now in the meta that is commonly played with 6 Bastion, so I wouldn't recommend just like hard forcing 6 Bastion if you see a Lightshield Crest. You can put on any tank unit and just get some extra value off of it. So it works well on, like, obviously, like, you know, if you're playing Galio reroll out of a Cypher, cash out, Sejuani, those are your Bastions that are primarily played, but it can also work on a Leona, a Jarvan, a Braum, even your reroll lines that have a bunch of armor and MR, you can still make use out of it. And especially if you're playing a solo frontline user that has a stone plate or has multiple stone plates, it can get a lot of value off of that as well. Next, we have our Luden's Tempest. So Luden's Tempest, 100% of your overkill damage plus 100 is going to be dealt as magic damage to 3 enemies nearest to the target. This is going to be really good on units that have high burst damage. It's a little bit more specific than some of the other items. A lot of units that do high burst damage, they might not be able to accept putting this item on their kit. So of course, it's going to be good on units like, you know, maybe like a Twisted Fate that's going to be doing a lot of extra like one-shot potential and just delete a lot of units. Units like Brand, where he's going to like drop a giant nuke and you're usually building them towards one-shotting units. And it's also good on units like sometimes, like, even if it's not AP, even though it's doing magic damage, it still gives AP and AD as a stat. So a unit like Shaco, where you can scale him up to have a massive amount of AD, he can work towards making this Luden's Tempest do a lot of work. It can also be good on Vigor, Draven, and Zed, but I would beware about Draven and Zed because Luden's Tempest is actually a very common Cypher cash out that you get with Draven. So a lot of times it's played on Draven for that reason, but Draven and Zed, it's a little bit of a Cypher skew. I think it wasn't super great on Vex, even though Vex is a really good one-shot unit. And the only thing I can think about is that it might just be that Vex is Vex just needs some other items in order to do the massive damage. Like, it just takes up a little bit of space. But in the future, just pay attention. It might be okay on Vex. I just wouldn't recommend it because for some reason when I looked it up, it didn't seem that great. But I think that you should lean towards the other units that I was talking about anyways. Next, we have Manazane. So Manazane is very generic. Out of this whole slide, if I have to give you one main takeaway, it would be that Manazane is one of the best items that you can get out of an ORNN artifact. In my opinion, it is very flexible. It's good on pretty much any unit that likes to cast. The way that it works is basically after you cast it your first time, you're just going to rapidly gain 120 mana. So you're basically going to get your first cast off and you're going to chain pump out a bunch of extra casts. It's really good. It can often replace other mana items, but sometimes if you have a unit that still wants to cast later into the game, you might have like a pairing of Manazane with another mana item just to make sure that they continue to get mana generation later. Sometimes if you put Manazane as the only item on a unit to generate mana, after those initial 5 seconds of chain casting, the unit then no longer is able to cast anymore because they don't have any mana generation past that first 5 seconds. But ideally, you want units that scale with early cast or do a bunch of damage with early cast. So these are units that do like massive burst damage. Vigor can work really well. It's really good on LeBlanc reroll. She just pumps out damage. Jinx, in certain cases, if you hit 3-star. Brand, Zed even, because Zed, if you get him to cast a lot in the early game, he basically summons a bunch of his shadows to a bunch of the units, and then he can just delete the whole board very easily because his first casts are very powerful. And he's obviously good at chain casting. Zaya, you just pump out the feathers and just absolutely decimate, even though like you might think mana generation is really powerful on AP units in particular. It can also work on AD units. Even a Garen can work really well. Seraphine, if you're playing like AP reroll, like the Seraphine Zyra reroll lines, it's really good on those type of boards because she can just pump out damage and just delete units. Manazane, very flexible. You can usually take it, and then based on your items, you can even play AD, like I said with Xayah. There's lots of holders for it. It can work really well. It's very good on Brand, and that's very meta right now. And it's very good on lots of other units that I'm sure can work out in the future, even with future patches like Annie, if Annie Amp becomes a little bit more widespread, or LeBlanc, for example. Next, we have Mittens. So Mittens, besides being one of the cutest items in the game, gives you 60 attack speed. It also makes them have like increased movement speed, and it gives them immunity to chill. The movement speed is pretty important on frontline style units. I say this item is pretty generic, however, because it does just give a shit ton of attack speed. So with the large amount of attack speed, you can usually put it on a lot of backline units as well, but typically you're going to put it on the frontline unit, and it's really good if that frontline unit has access to the backline, because chilling basically reduces another unit's attack speed. So if you're applying chill, it doesn't apply chill. Grant them increase and immunity to chill, excuse me. Typo in the slide, but what I mean, either way. You apply Mittens you give the Mittens to the unit now just has a bunch of attack speed. Attack speed works really well on units that want to either chain cast a bunch or just run around a lot. Just because, like, for example, if you think like a Zed and a Shaco, you want to auto attack a bunch because that's like how they generate their mana. And then once they do their cast, you want them to kind of run very fast because of the increased movement speed. That gives them little downtime, right? A lot of times you might be playing the game and Shaco's just like lollygaggling, strolling along while he's getting hit with a bunch of attacks. You want like units like Zed and Shaco to be constantly attacking, and you want them to like quickly get to another unit to attack because them being in the front line, they need to be constantly attacking to keep their Omnivamp up, right? If you have your Omnivamp constantly up, then as you're taking damage, you're healing that damage back up. So that's why it works really well on those type of units, because you don't want them to be in a spot where they're just walking around not hitting anything, or you don't want them to be standing in front of somebody not hitting them. You want them to constantly be auto attacking, because if they auto attack a bunch, then they'll be continuing to have uptime on that Omnivamp, which is why it works really well on them. And additionally, having immunity to chill means that they're not going to be in a spot where they're going to be having that attack speed getting slowed. It can also work well on Kabuko. Kabuko got reworked now that he basically does extra magic damage after his like Giga Cyber Boss, like not Cyber Boss upgrade, but after his like first cast, he does the whole thing where he does like extra AP damage every time he strikes them. So Mittens works well in that regard. It can also work well on Garen and Renekton. Both of them really like to have attack speed for similar reasons. But like I said before, you can also use it on backline units like Urgot and Samira and Aphelios. I suspect it is going to be good on Graves if Graves reroll becomes a thing. Right now, Graves is pretty weak, so he's not like a good option. So don't think too much about Graves, but I did put him on here. And it's also pretty good on Gragas reroll if you're playing the Hero Augment version. Next, we have Mogul's Mail. So this is another one of the gold generation artifacts. I think that this one out of the other gold generation artifacts is the weakest, so it's very rare that you take this one over the other two. But basically it gives you some HP, then it gives you armor, magic resist, and then armor, magic resist, and 5 health, basically stacking. When it stacks, you're gonna get gold drops, and it can continue to drop gold. It's usually used as an econ item, and since it got nerfed, it's never been like super relevant in the meta. It got nerfed like a couple sets ago, I think. It's really good on solo frontline tanks because they could just absorb a lot of damage and then stack up and generate a lot of gold. So like Braum, Alistar and Alistar reroll, Mundo and Mundo reroll. It can also work really well on Nico because it gives basically all the stats that Nico is missing. It gives armor, magic resist, and health, and Nico has a massive amount of durability because of the strategist trait. In general, you can put on any tank for econ generation, however, but I wouldn't necessarily think of this as like a win condition or a good artifact. It's pretty shit, so you know, only take it if you really have to or if you really want to generate gold. It's not super powerful in the stats that it has. Next, we have Prowler's Claw. So Prowler's Claw, after killing a target, you shed negative effects and dash to the furthest target within 4 hexes, and the next 2 critical attacks deal 60% bonus critical strike damage. It gives you a bunch of AD and a bunch of critical strike. This is pretty specific. It's obviously going to be only good on melee frontline style attack users. It's gives a large amount of AD, and it gives high mobility. It allows you to very easily access the backline, and it's great with crit builds. So these are conditions for, like, you know, Rost hero augment, Vi hero augment, but also Nefiri, Shaco, and Rengar. These are units that you're trying to, like, access the backline and scam a victory by just, like, absolutely decimating them. So it's really good on those units in particular. So if you see this, you should definitely be thinking about your melee frontline style reroll comps, because those are the ones that usually benefit from it. Somebody like Zed, even though he's a melee user, he already, like, accesses the backline easily and jumps around, so it's not super great on him, but that's another option if you're in a really bad spot. But obviously this only works on frontline units, because if you put on backline unit, they're just gonna teleport in the way. So, you know, the only unit that you can really put it on if you're looking for like a 5 cost out is Samira or Renekton, because Renekton being a frontline user, maybe Garen in some spots, but I don't think he was super great with it, because he's not really like the stats and the diving of the backline isn't super great for him. But Samira, she dives in and dives out, so it just gives her a bunch of crit chance and AD, which are stats that she likes anyways. Pair it with an IE, she can do a lot of damage with it, because she's going to be jumping around anyway, so she won't be in harm's way for very long. Next we have Rapid Fire Cannon. So Rapid Fire Cannon, basically you gain 1 attack range, and it increases whenever you kill an enemy. The main thing that it gives, however, is a shit ton of attack speed. Like before, it gives you 75 attack speed. So this is pretty generic. You can just put on units that like attack speed, but it's also a little bit more specific, because if you're taking it as an Ornn artifact, you know, it's not going to be as good as some other items. So a lot of times you want to make sure that it's paired with either an item that really wants that starting attack speed or wants the increased range. This is one of the great enablers of Shaco reroll. It makes Shaco into a backline user that then scales up their range, so he never really has to walk around or run. It's one of the best Shaco items for that reason, and you should always like consider angling Shaco reroll if you have a rapid fire or vice versa. It's also good on somebody like Aphelios, because Aphelios, you like the increased range, because he kind of does the whole, like, I forget what they're called, like chakras. I forget if that's what they're called or if I'm just like confusing it with a different word, but he just like throws his little like things and they kind of explode the backline, so having that increased range helps with that, and the starting attack speed is also really powerful. Additionally, you can put on units like Samira and Renekton. Renekton loves attack speed, and the range also helps him really well. It's similar to like having a rapid fire emblem on him, very powerful. Twisted Fate also loves to have attack speed, and so does Urgot. So these are units that you can put it on, just give them starting attack speed, get them ramping either their Gwinsu's higher, or get them to just do a shit ton of damage earlier on. Twisted Fate especially loves to have starting attack speed, because with that starting attack speed, he can ramp up a lot earlier and gain that AP, so he gets that one-shot potential earlier. Next we have Seeker's Armguard. So this is generic pretty much, or a little bit specific. It's a little bit of an awkward item, I would say. It gives you some AP and some resistances, and if you partake in takedowns, which means if you hit units and they die, then you get extra armor, mattresses, and ability power, and then if you actually score the kill, it's increased by 15. So this actually can scale your ability power really well and your tank stats. So typically you want to put it on like a frontline unit that can make use of both the AP as well as the armor and MR, but it's not super great because like the stats are a little bit awkward. It takes a while to like ramp up, especially if you're fighting against units that are hard to kill. But units like Braum, Varus, Twisted Fate, Fiddlesticks, these are units that hit multiple units. Right, like Braum has like his effect that he chills multiple units. Varus applies to multiple units. Twisted Fate hits multiple units AoE. Fiddlesticks applies it multiple AoE. So they can actually scale their ability power, and their magic resist pretty powerful, like in a pretty meaningful way. So it's pretty strong on them. Similarly, Aurora and Kabuko, they hit multiple units, so it work really well. I would think it's a lot better on a unit like Kabuko, because Kabuko, you want to have a lot of those tank stats as well. Fiddlesticks as well, it can work on those tank stats, but it's a little bit awkward because usually Fiddlesticks, you're looking for other conditions like Brightening Jewel, which is a lot better on him. I would say this item in general isn't very strong, but it could work kind of similar to like a shitty Archangels that gives you some tank stats. You can put on like Brand, Yuumi, Ziggs as well in a worst case scenario, so it's not the end of the world, but ideally you want to have a unit that is hitting multiple units, right? If you think about all the units I'm listing here, Brand, Yuumi, Ziggs, these are all units that have an AoE effect, because you want to make sure that you're partaking in as many takedowns as possible to actually scale up the item. You can't put it on a unit that's doing single target, for example. It's going to be very inefficient. Next we have Silvermere Dawn. Silvermere Dawn just gives you a shit ton of AD and a shit ton of resistances. It's an insane item that makes no sense, but you know, it is what it is. It grants immunity to stuns as well, and then all your attacks stun. Additionally, it locks your attack speed. That's not on this slide, but something that's really important is that it locks your attack speed. So you can't attack faster. Even if you put like attack speed items on the unit, they will not attack faster than I think 0.8. So they're going to attack very slow. It's pretty specific and forcing. There is some flexibility with it because it does give so much AD. It's an insane amount of AD. So if you're playing a unit that doesn't really care too much about having a bunch of attack speed, then you can make use of a bunch of AD on those units. But because it gives you a lot of resistances and it makes you immune to stun, a lot of times you're putting it on units that have really powerful ults or high mobility that are frontline units. So think Rengar. Nefiria can work in certain spots. A lot of times it's like paired with like Pulse Stabilizer or other artifacts. But the idea is that with all this AD, you're trying to have a unit that can crit and just absolutely decimate. When you see Silvermere Dawn, the main user you should be thinking about usually is Rengar, just because Rengar will jump to the back line and then he has the crit chance because he's an executioner. He has the ult critting, and then you're just having a shit ton of AD and resistances and immunity to stuns. He just dives the back line, stuns the back line, kills them in one hit, runs away. It's beautiful. It can work really well on Nefiria as well for that reason, but it's harder to get that wrap, so be careful. But then you can also use it on some reroll units that like to have that frontline stats. Something like Darius and Jarvan or even Garen can work really well with it because they're just going to hit multiple units. So like a Jarvan and a Darius, when they spin around, they're just going to one-shot everybody because they have the massive amount of AD from it, and it still gives resistances, so it actually works really well as a tank item for them as well. Rost, Hero Augment, it also works well. Similar reason, because Rost just jumps around and spins. So he spins, and he has 165 bonus AD, and he's immune to stun. If you think about backline units, somebody like Senna really doesn't care about attack speed or mana generation. She just kind of does her thing and absolutely one-shots. So Silvermere Dawn is good on a unit like that. And then obviously stat skewing because Samira is really good this patch. Something else you can think about is something like pairing it with a Horizon Focus. This is like, you know, often ORNN artifacts, they have synergies with each other, that if you have multiple ORNN artifacts, you can hit Exodia. So when you're done with Horizon Focus, now every time you attack, you're stunning, and Horizon Focus makes it so that they take extra HP as magic damage. It's just an interaction that I like to point out here, just to get your juices flowing in the head, in case you're thinking about like some cool Exodia builds that you might hit. Especially if you're getting something where you're getting multiple ORNN artifacts, like the Prismatic Augments that give you multiple. Like, I think it's Living Forge, it's still in the game. Next, we have Sniper's Focus. So Sniper's Focus is pretty generic. Basically, you get +1 attack range, so it works with a lot of those +1 attack range units, and you're getting 9% damage amp for every hex between you and the target. It works really well on units that are attacking from a distance, but because it gives you damage amp based on distance, it can work with pretty much anybody. It's just a really strong item. It gives good stats. It's pretty generic, just AP, AD, attack speed. And a lot of times, though, when you're thinking about the unit, you want units that have like big AoE effects because it also can scale up that AoE. This is one of the conditions to play Fiddlesticks. I think it's one of the strongest conditions to play Fiddlesticks, because Fiddlesticks will just like suck off a bunch of people, and the Sniper's Focus will just scale that damage up dramatically. And a lot of times you pair it with Archangels, and he just absolutely decimates everybody. So it makes him really strong, and it also puts him a little bit further out of range. So, or if you put him right up to the front line, then he can often snipe the back line and just like one-shot everybody. It's insane. It's really powerful. It's really strong on a unit like Brand as well, because Brand targets like a large clump, and then he shoots his bomb and then explodes into smaller pieces. If you can get the first hit of the bomb to hit a backline unit, which is usually not possible unless you have Sniper's Focus, you actually do an insane amount more damage. You can one-shot the enemies like that, like instantly. Aphelios, similarly, lots of AD because of Marksman, so it's pairing that with damage amp, give him something that gives him some crit chance, and you have a unit that's going to do insane damage. Similarly, Ziggs to Bran, just have extra access to backline and kill those backline units more easily. Units like Samira and Garen can also work really well. And then I just put a list of like pretty much everybody else, because everybody else, like no matter what your carry is, you can pretty much make use of it. It could also be good on units like Shaco that like to be +1 range, but without the massive amount of attack speed from RFC, it's a lot worse than like RFC and Fishbones. So of the options of range on Shaco, it's a little bit worse, so I didn't put Shaco on this list, because you probably want to think or lean more towards some of these other comps, either Fiddlesticks reroll or any 4-cost that just wants to have damage amp because they have a lot of base stats already. Next, we have Spectral Cutlass. So Spectral Cutlass, AD and crit chance, and combat start, you teleport to the mirrored hex. So basically you'll teleport to wherever your hex is. If you draw a diagonal line from the top right corner to the bottom left corner of the screen, that unit will teleport to that opposite side, right? Like it's kind of like the mirrored side of the board. It's not like the mirrored vertical side, it's the mirrored like opposite. So like, you know, you have to be a little bit attentive of that if it's your first time playing. It's pretty specific and forcing. Specific because it can work on a lot of different melee users. It's usually used to cheese the opponent. You basically just like put your unit, you teleport to the backline unit and just instantly one-shot them. The teleport happens first, so you have to be really careful. If you teleport and your unit isn't super tanky, or has good items, then they will just die before they kill or cheese the opponent. So be careful about that always. It can work with Vi, Ross, Graves. Graves here is a little bit awkward, of course, but that's more in like, you know, reroll lines. Renekton, Shaco, especially, just anybody who can like hit that backline really hard. But the main user is going to be Naafiri, because Naafiri, if you pair Spectral Cutlass with Pulse Stabilizer, which is the item that allows you to have an execute, it's basically the main condition to unlock Naafiri reroll. If you see Spectral Cutlass, the main thing you should think about is Naafiri reroll. There is a little bit of flexibility with it. Obviously, you can play other melee damage dealers, but the main user of it that you should think about is Naafiri. Naafiri is going to be the best option for just teleporting and one-shotting the backline and just running away. It's absolutely powerful, especially if you have Pulse Stabilizer, because then you also get the execute and the crit chance. It's insane. It's very good there. So that's why Naafiri is in that main user category almost on its own. Next, we have Suspicious Trenchcoat. Suspicious Trenchcoat, basically, you at 50% health, it got adjusted, by the way. This is pre-nerfs from last set, but now it's 60% health, so just make note, because there's some synergies that don't work as well with it anymore for that reason, right? There's, like, some items that, like, you know, they don't proc at the same time anymore. But basically, you split into 3 copies of yourself. It's pretty generic, because splitting into 3 copies can work on a lot of different units. You can put on pretty much any 5 cost or high cost unit that is a frontline damage dealer, because having 3 copies of the unit is obviously better than having 1 copy of the unit. It's really good on melee high damage units, and it also pairs really well with items that reset at a certain point. So for example, like Edge of Night, when you split into 3 copies of yourself, each of those copies will have an Edge of Night on them that will proc when they are at their Edge of Night HP. So that's like gives you triple Edge of Night value, which is really powerful. Something that's really good on is Naafiri. Similar to some of the other lines, I think it's the best on Naafiri in terms of the stats, just because splitting into 3 copies of yourself, especially if you have like a Pulse Stabilizer or some insanely high damage items, you're basically now one-shotting 3 units instead of one-shotting 1 unit. So it's really powerful, has really good pairing with lots of items for Naafiri, so look out for that. But then it can also work on units that have really good ults. Kabuko, Viego, right? Kabuko, you can just get 3 stuns off now, or you can get multiple stuns off. Viego, basically you just get Techie applied, jumping around a bunch. Shaco, you know, if you have him such that he's doing one shot, potentially you scaled him up, can work really well. Rost and Vi, hero augments can also work in a similar way, where they're just running around one-shotting everything. And then also you can put on units that have like wacky effects, like Zac Garen could work out really well. Zac especially, just split and then you get like multiple more with the little blob guys. It's a little bit troll on some of these units, because like it's like, you know, if your items don't work a certain way, or if they die at certain points, like, you know, Zac splitting with Suspicious Trenchcoat, the clones are going to be so weak that they probably won't get their stuns off anyways. They're all going to get one shot. So it's really just like good cheese if like your opponent doesn't have AoE damage and they're just a one shot type of board, because then they just have to deal with more units, if that makes sense. And it could also, there's some interesting synergies with Aurora that I think are really, really like cheesy, but like, you know, you can try it out, because if you split Aurora with Suspicious Trenchcoat, then she will summon 3 units off your bench, because each of them will have their summon ability reactivated, so you can get a bunch of extra units on your bench on your board. There used to be a synergy, I think it's still in the game, where you can take Aurora with Trenchcoat and have a Renekton, and Renekton will chew her HP, and then that will proc Suspicious Trenchcoat, and then she'll split into 3. I don't know if they got rid of it from the game yet. It was in the game last patch, and I have not tried it or seen it this patch, so I don't know. But that used to be a thing, but I'm just mentioning it because, like, you know, if you're really, really, really bored, you can try it out, but I wouldn't recommend it because I think they removed it, but I'm not 100% sure. But either way, if you split Aurora, then you can get 3 copies of units on your bench. I don't know, cook up something, have fun with it. I'm just here to tell you guys about it. Next, we have Talisman of Asscension. So Talisman of Ascension, basically after 22 seconds, you're going to gain 100% max health and 120% damage amp. This is insane for units that usually scale really well off of HP, and a lot of times it can be a win condition. However, Talisman of Ascension does nothing until 22 seconds. That's what you always have to look at it. It does pretty much nothing for 22 seconds of the fight, so a lot of times it's very bait. It's generally bad unless you have a board that can proc it very convincingly. It can be Exodia. There's a clip on my channel, you can check out the, I think it's called like 10,000 HP Nasus. And it's on it's on the shorts tab, and there was a video associated with it. That's the only time I ever did a Talisman of Ascension build that actually worked, and he basically just, it was similar to this set, except That was like the resident HP unit, right? It's good with hero augments in some cases, but there's not really like tanky hero augments this set where they're like giga monsters, so like it's not that good this set with hero augments. The main users you're looking at are either Cho'Gath or Dr. Mundo if you're playing Mundo as a 3-star unit, because both these units are probably going to live very long into the fight. Their whole thing is that they live forever and they scale off HP. If you get the Ascension off on Cho'Gath or Mundo, so if you can survive for 22 seconds, then they will just win you the fight usually, because they also do damage based off their HP, so they're just going to absolutely decimate everybody. You can also use it on units that can disengage pretty easily or stay alive very easily. Aurora and Twisted Fate, like Aurora being on your bench a while, she might be able to proc it and then get like the extra damage amp off. But I wouldn't recommend these. It's usually you're thinking about a Cho'Gath and Mundo item, and it has to be like a 6 bruiser setup, and you have to be like strong enough that your opponent isn't killing your units before they, like, you know, make it to the end of the 22 seconds. So it's risky. I wouldn't recommend taking it and forcing towards anything like that. It could be Exodia, it could be really strong, it could be like winning the game on the spot, but I would always caution it, because, you know, if you don't live until 22 seconds, that's a long time, right? A fight lasts 30 seconds. You're saying that for like two-thirds of the fight, I'm basically gonna like be down an artifact or an augment if this was your augment, and just accept that my board is gonna live. It's like sometimes it doesn't work out and then you just die anyways, and it's like you're better off just taking something else a lot of the time. But of course, if you have a 6 bruiser setup and you have something like, you know, Reinforced Skeletor, for example, and they're scaled up really heavily, or your Cho'Gath has really good items and you know for sure he's not gonna die, go for it. Next is Trickster's class. So basically you summon a clone. The clone has less health and more max mana, so they cast a little bit less frequently. And you can equip items to the clone. This is pretty generic. It could be specific in some cases, but it's pretty generic. You can put on anybody. The idea is that you're basically getting an extra copy of the unit. It's going to be really good on high cost units. It can also work with reroll tanks or reroll like if you have like a 3-star unit, because getting an extra copy of a 3-star is obviously going to be a lot better. A lot of times you want to use this as a tempo though, so you can usually take it. If you don't have another option for an ORNN artifact, you get a duplicate unit on your board, you punish all the people trying to play for their win cons, right? If somebody's like hard forcing something because of a particular artifact, well, now they have to deal with you for most of your mid game, having an extra unit on your board and just railing everybody in the lobby. But the main thing that you want to do with it is late game, transition it to be a 5-cost duplicate. Getting an extra 5 cost, they all have really powerful ults, so you can actually get a lot of value off of it. For example, Kabuko, get another massive stun. Aurora, get an extra unit on your board. Urgot, just massive damage. Samira, massive damage. Garen, massive damage. Zac, you get an extra dude that can break into 2 pieces, so you have like an equivalent of extra 4 like blobs on frontline. It's massive. Renekton as well can do a huge amount of damage. You're pretty much trying to find a 5 cost to play it on. You could also play it on other units like Sejuani, for example, try and get a second stun off. Zed, you know, have another unit that's kind of like tickling the back line and trying to kill them, you know, in conjunction with your primary Zed. It also gives crit chance and some attack speed, so it can work well on a Zed, for example. But just note, with the mana nerfs and the HP nerfs, a lot of times you just want to make sure that it's a unit that has a very impactful cast, and that's usually going to be your best case scenario. So think you're like your Kabuko Auroras and your other 5 costs. Alright, Unending Despair. So Unending Despair, whenever a shield in the holder breaks, 125% of that shield's initial value is dealt to the nearest enemy as magic damage. This is very specific because your unit has to have a shield. If your unit does not have a shield, this item is pretty much useless. It just gives a little bit, it gives 400 HP, which is okay, but it's pretty shit. So you need to have a shield, but there's a lot of units that have shields, so it's actually okay. It's a little bit of a Cypher skew. It says it's really good on Vi, but I'm pretty sure that's related to like the Cypher cash out where you get a bunch of Vi's and stuff. But of course, it's great with reroll. It can be really good with Exalted Adventure, I think. Usually you get like Unending Despair as one of those cash outs, so pair it with like a Crown Guard, for example. It could work really well on like Vanguards or anybody that just gets HP in general. But typically you're putting on units that have inherently a lot of shielding effects. So Braum, Vi, Skarner, Mordekaiser, even Kabuko gets a massive shield that could then do a bunch of damage. Jarvan gets a bunch of shielding. Garen gets a bunch of shielding. Nico, I don't know how much shielding she gets. The other ones I think are a lot better, and then Nico and Leona I think are a little bit worse. But basically, if your unit has shielding, which is a lot of all the units I put here, and maybe I missed one or two, there might be some other ones, but that's what you want to work with, right? Get your shield off, Unending Despair, do some extra damage. Really good on Braum, really good on Vi. Wit's End, we're getting towards the end of this actually, which is pretty fun. So Wit's End, this is an item, it gives some attack speed. basically attacks deal bonus magic damage. You want to put this on a unit that is attacking a lot, such that you're doing a lot of extra bonus damage. And the bonus damage also gets to heal you. So healing is you can think of it as being pretty good on units that like Gunblades. I would say it's a little bit forcing, a little bit specific. The main person you put on usually is Twisted Fate. Twisted Fate is your resident AP auto attacker, so it's just a perfect item for him. You can replace a Gunblade, which is typically an item you put on him anyways, and it pairs really well with Guinsoo. And you can think of it almost it's not necessarily a better Gunblade like I put in the slide, but it's like a substitute for Gunblade that can help you do more damage instead of healing your front line a little bit more. Stats say it's also okay on Fiddlesticks. I would be cautious about this because I think that it's mostly in conjunction with some other stuff, like some of the other artifacts. So I wouldn't think like Wit's End is a Fiddlesticks game. I wouldn't like be screaming that from the streets. But you can also put on like lots of units that like to auto attack, because they'll just do a bunch of extra damage. Urgot, Renekton, even Viego. These are units that the extra healing and the healing on Renekton and Viego is good. Renekton loves to auto attack, so you can do lots of bonus magic damage. And Viego, if he auto attacks a bunch and heals with it, could help you out quite a bit. And then Urgot also loves to auto attack. So these are units that are high cost units with really powerful abilities that love to auto attack. So Wit's End can work out really well on them as well. Finally, we're at our last artifact, which is Zhonya's Paradox. So Zhonya's Paradox, basically once at 40% health, you become invulnerable and intargetable. So it basically like removes you from the fight. It's kind of like a better Edge of Night, but it gives you AP and some resistances. It's pretty generic. It gives survivability for melee units, but because it's an AP item that gives you a lot of AP, it also works really well on backline units and gives them a lot of survivability. Basically, if there's a unit that tries to snipe them, units that have massive AoE, think like you're playing Twisted Fate and the other person's playing Brand, it gives you a lot of extra security because you know for sure that you're not going to die because you can survive at least one major hit while also giving yourself a lot of AP. A lot of times you want to put on AP units, but you can also put on melee users. If you have an AP melee user, then it's going to be really good on those units. So think Twisted Fate obviously can make great use of Zhonya's, Samira, Kabuko, Viego, Urgot, but pretty much any AP backliner is going to be amazing with Zhonya's. Or not amazing, but it's going to be good as an item, right? It just gives a bunch of AP, but it also gives them survivability. So you can put on any AP backliner and it will still be fine. It's pretty generic. But if I'm thinking about the best users of this, Kabuko, Viego, and to a certain extent Twisted Fate, because if Twisted Fate lives longer, he does so much damage with the auto attacks and just casting that he'll just delete the board. So a lot of times like Twisted Fate, the reason he works really well is that if you try to kill the Twisted Fate, then he'll proc Zhonya's. While he's Zhonya's, he can still do actions, so he can kind of clutch up. Basically, that's like the idea. Like you have a couple extra seconds to clutch up. But either way, more of a Viego Kabuko item, and Samira as well because she jumps in and can give her a second lease at life pretty nicely. But anyways, that is the end of the presentation. So hopefully this was helpful. I will try and put timestamps. I think I missed one of them, so maybe Brightening Jewel will be a little bit awkward for the friends at home. But either way, they're in alphabetical order. Hopefully this covered everything. Like I said, I tried to go through and interpret all the information that is out there, and I tried to give you guys the best information, not to bait anybody into playing something that I don't think is particularly reliable. Obviously, I might have missed some units, I might have missed some synergies. I do not care too much about like presenting like, you know, the broken things. Like there's some of these artifacts, for example, that work really well with certain augments that can then become Exodia. There's artifact pairings that can work really well. I mentioned one of them in the form of the what's it called, the Silvermere Dawn with for example Horizon Focus, right? There are obviously going to be situations because these artifacts have these really unique abilities where there are Exodia situations between units. I would say, you know, obviously play your artifacts, try and have ideas of units that they work on. Try and pick the more generic ones if you want to play more open and not play super forcing towards a certain setup. And don't worry too much about very, very, very particular stuff with your artifacts. A lot of times when you're chasing that like 1% game is where you lose a lot of LP along the way. So that's my main advice for everybody. Have fun. Hopefully this was helpful. It took a lot of work. I tried my best to go through everything and talk about amendments to anything that had to be changed. So hopefully it was appreciated. Thank you for watching. Have a great day and see ya. Bye bye.